Recording now. And now it gets silent. That's usually how it goes.
Nice. No, okay. Do you guys mind if I just pick up where we left off? I wanted to summarize the narrative just really fast at the beginning of this, to catch anyone up, so we can go from there. But so we have the story of Diarmuid. He is basically pressured into marrying Grainne, and Grainne is intended to be married to Finn, but she doesn't want to marry him, so she runs off with Diarmuid. They essentially become exiled because they know Finn is going to come after them and try to kill Diarmuid for taking Grainne, even though he was resistant at first. He didn't want to go with Grainne, but she pressured him into it, basically forced him to, and so he kind of accepts it and goes into exile. Finn chases after them, and before that event happens, of course, the sequence where Diarmuid gains the Loathly Lady comes and becomes his sort of wife for a while. She is the symbol of sovereignty, so he has the sovereignty that he loses by saying the false or offensive words against her, breaking his promise 3 times in a triple form, losing the sovereignty, and then the Grainne episode happens. They go into exile. She's the king's daughter. They go to an enclosure that they create that's in a defensive enclosure for a while in the forest. They escape there and continue running, and eventually end up in another forest where there is a tree that is being guarded by a guardian of the Tuatha Dé Danann. The tree has berries that extend life, essentially indefinitely if you keep eating them. And it is the one forbidden thing in the forest. And what happens is the Sons of Morna, they want to be reinstated with Finn. Basically, there's hostilities between the Sons of Morna. That's Gaul Mac Morna. His sons want to be reinstated with Finn because I think it's Gaul who killed Finn's father. So there's a hostility between them, even though, as we know, Gaul and Finn are both forms of the Rudra type deity. So there's this split between them. And the Sons of Morna want to be brought back into the good graces of Finn, and there to be peace between them. So but Finn is very stubborn about this because they've killed, their family killed his father. So he's like, the only thing that would make peace would be if you go get Diarmuid's head, which he hasn't been able to get himself, or get these impossible, or they're not impossible, get these very difficult to retrieve berries that are guarded by this terrible ogre. And so they go to Diarmuid, and they find Diarmuid there, basically, and they ask Diarmuid about this, and he says, "You're not going to get my head, so you better go try to get those berries yourself, but you're probably not going to get those either." And then after he sends them away, they're not able to get the berries. But then Grainne has now heard about the berries from the Sons of Morna. So this is important for what I want to talk about. But they've brought this idea about the berries to Grainne's attention. And then she says, "I will not sleep in your bed again until I taste these berries." And then Diarmuid goes and kills the ogre guarding the berries, and he makes the Sons of Morna pick the berries and take them to Finn and says, "Tell Finn that I, Diarmuid, actually picked these." Sorry, let's see. How does it work? No, okay. what happens is it's complicated. First, he makes the Sons of Morna pick them and give them to Grainne. And Grainne says, I won't eat these unless Diarmuid has picked them. So Diarmuid tries to leave himself out of the getting the forbidden fruit at first. But Grainne keeps pressuring and says, I will only eat these if Diarmuid has picked them. And so Diarmuid goes back and, okay, I'll pick them. And he picks them and then gives some to the Sons of Morna and says, take these back to Finn and tell him that you yourself picked them, the Sons of Morna. So it's a lie. He's continually trying to cover for himself that he was involved in the picking of the berries specifically. And he wants to give the credit. He also wants to give the credit to the Sons of Morna so they can go away and have their peace with Finn, that they did the thing. But when they take the berries to Finn says, I can smell Diarmuid's flesh on these, and you guys didn't really pick these. This isn't, acceptable. And now now I know where Diarmuid is, and I'm going to track him back to this forest. So that's how he learns where Diarmuid is hiding. Then he goes there, and Diarmuid is hiding in a tree. So I just want to reiterate this simple narrative and how all these points hit the Yima narrative, which is he gains the sovereignty, loses it in a triple form, is pressured into marrying this forbidden princess, whatever, by her. She tricks him into marrying her, and then they're exiled, chased down to an enclosure, and then found hiding in a tree, specifically like as in the Yima myth and as in the Yama hymn where he's in a tree. All these things are fitting. And then one thing I wanted to let's see. There's a few things I wanted to touch on, but going off of this is what Arno might have been talking about. But I want to give credit for Arno for pointing this possibility out, and we can discuss it. He's not here right now, unfortunately, but So the Sons of Morna, I think, because they're the family of Gaul Mac Morna, they're extensions of Gaul. I think it makes sense. So let's see. In the Ironic version, it is Zahak or Ahi or Azi Dahak. There's Azi Dahak or Zahak are variations of his name. He is the main. It's him and sometimes one of his brothers. And sometimes Ahriman himself is involved in chasing Yima in exile. But Zahak, I always thought that Zahak was similar to Balor of the Irish version because Zahak is the one who is killed by Feridun in the myth that surrounds the festival of Mehergan, or Merigan, or whatever, however you pronounce it, which is okay. So Merigan is the festival in Iranic tradition that happens at the beginning of October, right? And it's this sort of great conclusion to Zahak has been this is the great threat, and the hero deity Feridun finally kills him at the beginning of October. In Gaelic tradition, you have Lu, the sovereign warrior hero, god of victory and all that. He kills Balor supposedly at the end of October or beginning of November around Samhain. So it's a little bit of a loose comparison, but the big threat in the Iranic epic cycle in that can be compared somewhat to Balor seems to be Zahak. And Zahak has other elements of how he's bound at the end, remind of maybe Loki or Fenrir, but kind of Loki-esque. So he could have some of these combined elements. But this goes along with the theme of Ahriman and his allies all being kind of having Rudra type, demonized Rudra, demonized emanations of Rudra and variations on that, as well as demonized Vishnu elements because of the overlap of Vishnu and Rudra. So my theory was that Zahak could be the parallel of Balor and Gaul, who are continuous figures. Balor, Gaul are actually they're either one and the same, or they come from the same sort of root, split apart. So what you have is, in my theory that I'm putting forward, you have the Sons of Morna. They're representatives of Gaul himself. So they would parallel in this theory. They would parallel Zahak, who is the one chasing Yima or Jamshid, and so in the Gaelic one, it's Finn and the Sons of Morna together chasing Diarmuid. What's interesting that I think Arno was pointing to maybe, but Azi Dahak or Zahak, his first name Azi means serpent, right? And he has two serpents growing from his shoulders. So he was also pointing out, Arno was pointing out that there is a Rudra emanation named, what was it? It's in the thing right here. Ahirbudnya or something. Ahirbudhnya. Ahirbudnya. The name begins with Ahi, which also means serpent, Ahi or Azi. So he is the serpent that's foundational to the cosmos in some sense. And that's a form of Rudra in different texts. It's one of his emanations. Or it's also connected to Sesha, the serpent that Vishnu rests on. But in this context, it might be important that it's connected to Rudra and Shiva as well. So there's some serpent connection directly with the name Ahi, connected to Rudra himself in the Vedic tradition. Then in the Iranic tradition, you have Azi Dahak. His name means serpent, Azi Ahi, and he has the serpents. Shiva himself, of course, has Vasuki, the serpent wrapped around his neck, and Vasuki is the brother of Sesha. I don't know if there's this connection with the serpent wrapped around his neck, resting on his shoulders, and Azi Dahak has serpents growing from his two shoulders that are evil, demonic serpents in that case. But anyways, if Azi Dahak parallels the Sons of Morna, and he is the serpent. His name means serpent. He's the serpent form connected to the Rudras, seemingly. Then it could imply that the Sons of Morna, at their root, are connected to the concept of the serpent, the Ahi or Azi. What the Sons of Morna do in the Diarmuid myth is they bring the idea of taking the fruit to the attention of Grainne, the wife of Diarmuid. So this is why it's interesting. If you see where I'm going, the serpent in Adam and Eve story is the one who tempts Eve, tells Eve, you should take these berries, this fruit that's forbidden. In the Diarmuid myth, it's the Sons of Morna who come in and say, "There's these berries, or we need to take these. We need to take this fruit," and brings it to the attention of Grainne, who then by that knowledge pressures Diarmuid into taking them. The Sons of Morna are the only other figures in this scene other than the guardian of the tree itself. They're the ones who come in and bring this extra element, this extra idea of taking the fruit to the attention of Grainne, and then she seizes hold of it and says, pressures her husband, Diarmuid, which becomes, when you look at it that way, with, the Sons of Morna have no obvious serpent aspect to their name, but if they come from the same root as Ozzy Dahak, they could be the serpent, the serpent Rudra sort of connection. In the deep past, at their root, they could have come from this concept, because you can see that they're playing a similar role to the serpent in the Adam and Eve story. So I think that's a really interesting possibility, based on the possibility that maybe Ozzy Dahak, it parallels this Aki Budnya of the Vedic tradition. What do you guys think? Does that make sense? Do you see any problems with that?
No, it makes sense, but just trying to think. So I don't know whether it actually says in the actual text of the Bible, at least, whether the serpent is actually Satan. But I think it ultimately, I mean, you got to draw the conclusion.
I don't think it says that necessarily.
Yeah, it doesn't specify that in the Old Testament. The New Testament kind of makes it clear, and probably there was already plenty of speculation around their identity.
Yeah, obviously.
But then the whole thing, the serpent, Lucifer, Satan, they're kind of not explicitly equated in the Old Testament. All equations are obviously resulting from later interpretations of the same motif. By the way, Gilgamesh also has the serpent stealing the plant of eternal youth, so ultimately it's probably a widespread element. Also possibly comfort the usual serpents, like the serpent in the Jason myth guarding the golden fleece. So there are instances of parallels both in the Semitic or broadly Mesopotamian and in the Indo-European world. So we might have to try to figure out the origins, the ultimate origins, if there's any of this kind of symbolism.
Well, what I was going to say, if it had actually mentioned the serpent by that name, is like, Satan ultimately means just adversary. It doesn't really make sense now that I think about it.
It makes sense because it makes sense if you compare it to Iranic tradition, at least. I mean, not the adversary part in particular, but in Iran, Zahak and Ahriman, who are allies, they are like Satan. They are the devil. Zahak is like the devil. He is the serpent, and he's a great opponent, and he wants power, and he feeds the serpents on his shoulders, the brains of humans, and so he's very demonized. And but it connects to this demonization of the Rudra type, possibly. Different, if you look at Ozzy Dahak paralleling Gaul / Valor, and then Ahriman himself paralleling Finn, it kind of, those are the ones being demonized. But in the Irish tradition, they're not demonized, of course, but they do have a terrifying aspect.
And then Gaul is ultimately the one who saves Finn from Ernan. Doesn't that complete the character arc there?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm forgetting the order of events, and I can't remember if Gaul is alive during the Diarmuid story or not. That's the one thing. But basically, yeah, Gaul and Finn have a rivalry and hostilities between them, but they also work together. And like in the Ernan story, Gaul isn't there at first because they're he's in a feud with Finn, and but it kind of says, well, okay, there's different versions of the story. I think maybe the later versions play up the drama between them, and says, like, secretly he really loved Finn, and when Finn was really in trouble, he couldn't let him get killed. He had to come run to his rescue, even though Gaul would kill the members of Finn's family at will and have this feud going on. He really actually loved him, and so that's sort of maybe an elaboration later on, but it shows what the idea was behind their feud. They're actually kind of go back and forth with sort of a feud, friendship sort of thing.
Well, I want to go back to something me and Arno talked about after you guys left. I'm sure, and I think you listened to that part, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, when I was saying, like, is it like in Mesopotamia it's a plant, and then in Irish it's berries, and then in the Bible it's fruit. It's actually, I don't even think if it's really described other than just fruit. So,
yeah, exactly. So it doesn't really contradict berries.
No. But
you don't really know what it was.
Way,
but my main point
the
is
apple interpretation only makes sense in the Latin translation because it's a kind of pun on malum being apple and malum meaning evil. So it's probably something that wasn't in the mind of the Hebrew writers of the Bible, possibly not even in the minds of the translators who made the Septuagint in Greek. It just came eventually later. So it's probably not extremely relevant. Also, the plant of eternal youth in Gilgamesh, as far as I can remember, is not really described as anything more specific. Ultimately, what matters is not the classification from a botanical perspective. What matters is the symbolism, which is very explicit in the names, like plant of eternal youth or fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, fruit of eternal life, this kind of names that we see around. Which may not be as explicit in the Irish for obvious reasons of the tale being written down in Christian times.
Well, okay, my main point is, and the reason why we may not have it being fruit in the Indian and Iranic versions is simply because Indian and Iranic ethics just went the totally opposite route, where meat is sort of the taboo. But then again, we also have in Plato talking about how they used to offer before the Iron Age, basically. And they only offered pure offerings of like grains and barley instead of meat offerings. So like you could technically justify that taboo in most IE societies if you really wanted to. But that's my theory on why it's meat instead of fruit in India and Iran.
Yeah, that makes the most sense to me. It's so strange to me that there isn't, that I know of, another Indo-European version of this where it is fruit. And even if you look at the Norse, maybe there's something buried in a saga or something, like a euhemerized version.
Yeah.
But with the Mimir myth, you don't really have this motif surviving with Mimir.
Even's apples are pretty obviously cognate, and when you first mentioned the ogre, I thought of Thiazi. So
I really think it's a different myth, and
sure.
There is maybe I think there's some. Let's see. Well, you do have Loki. Maybe Loki is, but the events. I mean, they could have just sort of like combined different events. It's happening in a different point in the narrative with different things around it. So that's why it makes me think it's different, unless they somehow, took part of that myth and combined it with the the Njordur, the Skadi sort of mythos that's happening connected to that. So it's. Hey, I don't know. I don't know ultimately. But
going back to
the apples specifically, the apples. Well, let me just say, the apples of Ithun in the actual cycle of myths that's happening in the narrative, they play the role that the herbs brought by the Ashvins to Chavana play, because the apples are brought, and it's the gods who eat them and need them, and it's specifically Njordur is he's there in the story, and he marries Skadi as a result, and so it's connected to the like Chavana in the Indian one. He's grown super old, and he has to be renewed in his youth in the waters using this special herbs. It's herbs and that the Ashvins bring. And in the Norse one, this revolves around the marriage of Skadi and Njordur, who all the gods have begun. They need the apples. They become decrepit, which isn't really what's happening in the forbidden fruit story. It isn't really about the gods.
It's forbidden. I guess it's like the whole concept is like forbidden fruit. But one thing I
guess Finn does need them. So that would be
yeah. But it's obviously a different myth. It just has some weird similarities with parts of Norse.
Yeah, like I do wonder if some things were being combined and kind of boiled down, motifs brought together. Yeah.
So, but I'm on the Wikipedia right now for Ethan, and Hilda Davison said that there's a strange phrase used in an 11th century poem by a guy named Thorbjorn Brunesen, and it says it uses the phrase "apples of hell" with the one L. So right. It like directly relates it to the underworld there.
Lord of the Dead sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And it even brings up a cognate in Irish stories.
Okay. Maybe there's a different.
Yeah.
I do remember something. Does it mention what it is?
No, it doesn't, which is stupid.
Oh, okay. Huh. I'll have to look into that. I remember something, a different one where there's apples being stolen, golden apples being stolen from a tree, and can't remember, some harpies or something guarding it. Anyway.
Okay. So
I wanted to.
There is yeah, they have more on it right here. It has been noted in the Celtic myth where Brienne, Luchar, or Uchar and Ichchar, that these are horrible. I cannot pronounce these.
I know.
Tyrion assume the guise of hawks in order to steal sacred apples from the garden of his Berna.
They're the ones flying. I knew somebody was flying around. Yeah. So maybe that one parallels, but also the narrative context around that is pretty different as well. So it's hard to know how these motifs.
This is the myth you just brought up. Here too, there is a pursuit. The guardians being female griffins.
Oh, okay. Guardians being, and that's in what?
That's in the story of the Sons of Morna.
Oh, the guardians are female griffins. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So yeah, that's a big open question. Is there anything else on the Mesopotamian things that you guys thought was relevant? Gilgamesh.
Arno had some stuff about that.
There's a lot on Gilgamesh. Yeah.
Well, on Gilgamesh, we probably could draw a broader comparison between the kings of Uruk, of which Gilgamesh is the fifth, if I remember correctly, and the seven kings of Rome, which actually do have some similarities which do not seem entirely coincidental, and more broadly, the Indo-European pattern of functionality, which is usually Indo-European. So it's very curious and interesting that Sumerians would happen to have that in their own mythical dynasty. The dynasty of Uruk begins with Meshki-Angashur, who is the founder of the city and mysteriously disappears into the sea. You can easily come for Romulus, who mysteriously disappears, whether in a storm or well, there are other versions about his disappearance, or in some versions he actually dies, but like we still have a common pattern of this founding figure. Then we have also, by the way, both Romulus and Meshki and Gasher are explicitly sons of a deity, which doesn't usually happen to the other kings, with one possible exception in each king list. Then we have the wise king, Numa in Rome, who is credited with founding most institutions, religious institutions especially, and Enwerkar in Uruk, who is credited with inventing writing. Then we have the third king, who is a warrior of swords, Tullus Hostilius in Rome, and Lugalbanda among the Sumerians. Then we have a peaceful king, Ancus Martius in Rome, and Duzi in the Sumerian list. And then we have a sort of break from the kings who are in some way more divine, quote unquote, or in some way still belonging to the realm of functionality. You can easily recognize the three functions of the wise king, the warrior king, and the peaceful king. And then we have the kings who are not functional anymore, which are in both cases three kings. So we have the Tarquins in the Roman case, we have the two Tarquins and Servius in between them. In the Sumerian case, we have Gilgamesh and his son and his grandson, or in other versions, his two sons. Either way, we have Gilgamesh and his two heirs forming a group of three who are in some way, we would say probably with Allen, F4 minus. So they are symbolic of otherness in a negative way. In the Roman instance, it's pretty easy. The otherness comes from being foreigners, essentially. Tarquin the first is the son of a Greek man who emigrated to Etruria, so he's like a lot of a mixed heritage kind of person, which was not very common in ancient times, so definitely a symbol of otherness. Then Servius was actually the son of a slave woman in some versions. His paternity was highly debated, so I mean, we also have an instance of someone being othered in a negative way, but he could also be othered in a slightly positive way if his father was believed to be the god Vulcan, as some sources claim. Gilgamesh has precisely the same situation. He's of uncertain parentage. In some versions, his father is said to be a ghost, so he doesn't really have a living father or a known father. In other versions, he's the son of Lugalbanda, which is pretty convenient, as Lugalbanda is the husband of his mother. So it's probably, it could be just a way to fix the genealogy, quote unquote. Also making do with his older half brother in some versions, once again, trying to fix the whole genealogical thing. But either way, he is a demigod. So in either way, his father is not a full-on deity. He may be a hero or a ghost, but not a proper deity. His mother, on the other hand, is a deity. And he is the one who essentially loses immortality. So he's the one who actually interrupts the list of kings who can get closer to godhood, who can ultimately be functional, be just, be part of the quote-unquote Indo-European societal scheme, although we're talking about a Sumerian instance. And then we have Gilgamesh signaling this kind of break, being essentially the negative otherness, which comes with the sort of division from the divine, a loss of immortality, loss of eternal youth. And we have the first king who is in some way more human than divine, although he does also get divine honors in some sources, just to make it a bit hard for us to frame him very precisely. Also, obviously, there are other shared motifs, like obviously the war for the female deity of fertility, which we could get back on in other instances. But we do have a functional kind of system here. So we probably can look for this kind of functional system in the other parallels, in the Indo-Iranic ones or Celtic ones. we do have a very clear instance, like Yama is usually the F4 minus, so the negative or devalued otherness in Indian sources. Usually when he appears in groups of 3 or 4 or 5, you know that Yama is going to be the negative otherness kind of figure. Nick Allen has dealt with it extensively. He has partly dealt with Yima as well, although Yima can get more of a positive otherness as well, so it's kind of more complicated. But in the case of Yama, it's quite unambiguous, and so we have a match for Gilgamesh's role as the one who is outside of functionality as we know it, and also a match for being the one who is the first mortal, or the first one who loses explicitly immortality slash eternal youth.
I saw on the Wikipedia of Gilgamesh, it mentioned that there's at some location, at some point in time, Gilgamesh was worshipped as some sort of underworld deity, which I don't know if it was, the major tradition regarding him, but that would be quite interesting if there was even some sort of connection of him to Lord of the Dead sort of idea. I wish I remember where it was, but anyways, it's just a passing mention on the Wikipedia. And one question that it brings up for me is the connection between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Are they supposed to be, I guess, originally Enkidu supposedly was a more minor servant character and became a more important figure in later texts, is what it implies as well in the Wikipedia.
Well, the Sumerian texts simply call him a slave, so not quite a glorious appellation, although they do portray him as wise, courageous, so more than you would expect from a normal slave. But then, in the Akkadian versions, you usually have Enkidu made as a sort of twin brother of Gilgamesh, essentially made to match him in strength, intelligence, all the qualities, to be equal, but in some way opposite to him. So he actually is forced to recognize that he's not the supreme or superior in everything. There is someone who can rival him, who can actually challenge him. And yes, they ultimately are extremely close, probably to an unhealthy degree, depending on the version you ask.
So the question is, the parallel of Enkidu to Adam has been made because Enkidu is sort of the wild man who gets seduced by the sacred prostitute in the state of nature, and she, they have a lot of sex, and then she civilizes him in some way. The question is, of course, is he also a parallel of Adam, and are both Gilgamesh and Enkidu taking part of that mythos that we see? Are they sort of doubles, like you say? Are they so close that they're doubles, and they're both taking parts of one shared mythos? One thing I want to throw out there is that in the Irish story, they do come across, as they're running away and in exile, Diarmuid and Grainne do come across a sort of a young warrior who wants to be their sort of helper and servant. He cooks fish for them every night, and then for a while, and then they leave him behind at some point, and he helps Grainne and things like that. But so I don't know if there was like a servant role mixed in there originally, and then some of the mythos kind of got spread around between them, or do you think Enkidu is a valid parallel of Adam, or is that a mistake?
Well, that's definitely hard to say. Like, obviously, neither Enkidu nor Gilgamesh is the first man or the first mortal in an absolute sense. So obviously, every parallel to Adam would still be lacking this pretty important element, possibly. But ultimately, the idea of woman being the sort of perdition of man in Mesopotamia is specifically tied with the Enkidu instance. it's kind of like Pandora with Epimetheus in the Greek instance. So there could be something valuable there. What is also interesting is that Yama is archetypically the god who is a twin or a mirror image, a sort of imitation. Image and imitation actually come from the same Proto-Indo-European root as Yama. So it's not actually a random choice of words. And this could possibly relate to the fact that Gilgamesh has this sort of twin / mirror image / imitation in some way. I'm not saying obviously that they're necessarily going to be perfect parallels with the pairs of twins that we find, like Manu and Yama. Obviously they aren't, but we do have the idea of twinning, the idea of mirroring, being somehow carried on to this kind of first man kind of character, or loser of immortality kind of character.
I still wonder if there's even a real Manu parallel, or are there good Manu parallels in European traditions even? It like I thought there was one in Gaelic tradition, but it turns out he's probably, you know, the Agni or Irmun parallel. Anyway, do you guys? I can't think of a. Do you think Manu is an Indo-Iranic or even, you know, mostly Vedic development as the twin of Yama, or was there this twin concept floating around? Obviously with Yama and Yami, that was floating around. Concept of twins connected to Yama in his name, but Manu himself doesn't have clear. Maybe I don't know the Greco-Roman possible parallels.
Well, yeah, looking at the Greek instance, I would be tempted to say that there's essentially no instance of them being really twins. Like Deucalion, who is the Manu parallel, is not obviously in any way the twin of Hades, but there could be a possible relationship in Prometheus and Epimetheus, who are twins. Epimetheus being the father of Deucalion, and Prometheus being the one who warns him. No, actually, Epimetheus is the father-in-law of Deucalion. Prometheus is the biological father of Deucalion and the one who warns him about the flood. So maybe the twinning aspect in Deucalion has been shifted to the previous generation, possibly. Also, looking at Hades himself, in some versions he's born with a twin sister, obviously a Yami parallel, but I do not think he has like a specifically Manu parallel twin brother. So
exactly, he doesn't.
So if there is any twinning in the Greek tradition, it has been shifted up a generation. Then in Rome, there's the big question. Like Remus is obviously a Yama parallel in some way. He does kind of lose immortality in the sense that he's the first person to die in Rome. Obviously not the first one to die in the whole world, but I mean, obviously there's this sort of new level of the myth. So what happens in Rome is a mirror image of what happens on a cosmic level, if you will. So is Romulus a kind of Manu parallel? He obviously does not survive the flood, unless you count the Tiber as a sort of flood parallel, but it would be an extremely huge stretch. I'm not willing to risk it too much. But he is the first king of Rome, so he does have a parallel to Manu. Also, pretty interestingly, Manu has this issue of having children, right? He at first doesn't know how he will reproduce. He obtains through sacrificial means a wife in some versions. Then he and his wife have a lot of rituals to bring about, I think, 9 children in total. So he has this issue, right, of trying to have children, which is the same issue that Romulus faces on a much more pragmatical and less ritual level. Although, well, obviously it does relate to ritual in many ways. When he founds Rome and all the Roman citizens are males, usually male warriors, right? So they do not have wives and consequently no way to have children. And this essentially forces them to abduct Sabine women so that they can intermarry and they can actually have these expected offspring. So this may be one of the many elements, like being the first king, being the one who is concerned with the reproduction of human beings, and especially, or whether in general or specifically in his own city. It could point to some common origin. Obviously, Manu alone is probably not enough to explain all elements in Romulus. Nick Allen had a very good article comparing Romulus to Bhishma, who also has the issue of providing offspring for his family, and so kidnaps 3 princesses for this reason. So obviously it's not as clear-cut, but possibly the Manu Yama, Romulus Remus kind of thing could point to an older origin than just an Indo-Iranic development, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just still can't find now that I kind of ruled out Erevan or Eramon, that in the Gaelic tradition he doesn't seem to actually be or no, that's Ahriman. The Manu version, let's see, who is Manu? I guess Averian, who Amergin, as I would pronounce it, but it's something like Averian, and scholars had proposed that he could be Manu actually, but he turns out to be the Gaelic Shiva. So scholars were incorrect again. Okay, I wanted to just go through a few more things with Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu, they do fight a guardian of a tree in a forest, which is Humbaba. Diarmuid has a servant at one point, cooks some fish, then leaves and goes and fights an ogre guarding a tree. Gilgamesh and Enkidu together go and fight the ogre Humbaba, who's guarding a tree, and cuts down the tree for the goddess to give to the goddess, I believe. And then later, without Enkidu, so Enkidu also leaves, kind of like the servant of Diarmuid. Enkidu is the one who goes and almost gets the plant of immortality, but then loses it to a serpent, which is interesting. That's that Diarmuid also goes and gets the berries, and the Sons of Morna then take it and give it to Finn. Although in the Diarmuid story they also eat it. Diarmuid and Grainne also eat the fruit. But then the death of Diarmuid I wanted to talk a little bit about, because it also has this theme. This is a theme that you see in across cultures in stories about the origin of death and mortality, is humans almost get resurrection or something that gives the promise of immortal life, but then the gods or something happens that takes it away and confirms death as a reality, confirms mortality as the rule going forward. And this is in the Gilgamesh story, where the serpent he almost gets the plant. The theme is basically they almost get it, and then it's taken away by something. So Gilgamesh swims to the bottom of the ocean or something and gets this plant, right? And then he looks away for a second. I can't remember exactly how it happens. He looks away, and a serpent steals it and runs off with it. So then he doesn't get immortal. He doesn't get eternal life. The Sumerian story about Adapa has this similar myth where he is summoned to Anu, the sky kings, sky gods, palace in the sky, and Enki, the trickster Enki, who is a Prajapati. He's actually a Prajapati type god, but he tells Adapa, don't drink anything, don't drink or eat anything up there, or it'll be bad for you. And when Adapa goes up there, they offer him the food and drink of immortal life or eternal life, and he listening to Enki, he says, "Oh no, I won't." And And then because of that, he missed his chance to get eternal life. It was a trick by Enki, who, he was pretending that he was giving him good advice, but really he was tricking him into missing out on eternal life. So this is a theme you'll find it in folklore in Africa and in America, and the gods created humans, and then they were going to give them immortality, and then another god comes in and changes that at the last second, takes it away. In the Finn and Diarmuid story, Diarmuid he gets disemboweled by a boar. What happens is he's disemboweled, he's dying, and Finn had made a truce with him after he escapes the tree. Finn comes and tries to get him in the tree, and he escapes, and then he makes a truce with Finn. It's sort of a tentative truce, though, because Finn really still wants him dead. So when Diarmuid was a child, there was an event where Angus's steward had a child also, so sort of like a servant of Angus had a child, and Donn is the father of Diarmuid. He was a child. Diarmuid was a child, and the steward's son was a child, and they were all together. And then Finn and Angus were paying more attention, giving more favors to the son of the steward, and Donn got jealous because Diarmuid was being ignored, and so he kills the son of the steward. Like the child runs between his knees and he crushes his head with his knees. Donn does. So it's this. It's another theme that I want to reiterate, that this Diarmuid story is full of these sort of themes you see across cultures connected to the origin of death, because the steward of Angus and his son, in my opinion, they must be death itself or something like that, the actual death god, as opposed to the Lord of the Dead. So there's this Donn/Diarmuid is the Lord of the Dead, and then this steward, he's this mysterious steward, and his son, because the son gets killed, but then he gets brought back to life in the form of a boar. And this boar has he has the property that he will only live as long as Diarmuid and him are now tied together. They're basically like doubles. So you could say the Lord of the Dead and death itself are like doubles. But the steward makes this curse, basically, that their lives will be tied and they will die at the same time. And so basically the boar will be the death of Diarmuid. There's this doom now on Diarmuid that the boar one day eventually will kill Diarmuid. And so Diarmuid gets this taboo that he can't hunt boars after that, because he doesn't want to accidentally kill the boar that means that he's going to die now. So this connects to motifs you see in folklore about sort of taking life, like hunters taking life when they hunt, and now they owe a death in return, and that's the origin of death in some primitive folklore and things like that. So it would make sense if this whole story is framed by this. I don't want to call it an original sin by Donn, but there's this original framing violence that Donn creates, probably against death itself, and death has to have now creates this this debt, right? It's this concept of debt, a debt that is owed to death itself now, and that is the doom that is overhanging Diarmuid his whole life, and that in the end comes and introduces and finally kills him, which introduces the cycle of ongoing mortality. And none of that is obviously explained, but that's kind of what makes sense to me, because there's these themes you see. And the other one is this theme of almost getting resurrection or immortality, but losing it, because when Diarmuid is disemboweled, he's laying there dying. Finn, he had instigated the hunt for this same boar that was going to kill Diarmuid. He instigated this hunt against it, because if he kills the boar, he can bring about Diarmuid's death without actually killing Diarmuid himself. So he doesn't break his truce against Diarmuid, but he actually wants him dead. So he instigates this hunt against the boar, and then Diarmuid finds out. At first he goes, "I'm going to go hunt the boar too," and then he finds out that it's that same boar, and he's like, he runs away from it because he's like, "Well, actually, I can't hunt this boar. That's the boar I can't hunt." And but then it chases after him and gores him. And Finn he's still filled with rage. So Diarmuid begs him, says, "You can heal me. It is known that the waters from the hands of Finn can restore life, can bring about, any healing." And so Finn has to go to the river and get water in his hands. And he goes 2 times, and each time he's too angry and he lets the water go through his hands before he reaches Diarmuid to heal him. And finally, on the 3rd time, he's feeling like, he might actually heal him, but he's bringing the water back, and Diarmuid dies just before Finn can arrive with the water that would restore his life. So it's this, I think it's this concept of he almost gets, if you look at Diarmuid, he's framed in this very specific way as the Lord of the Dead, who is the twin of, not actual twin, but the sort of the double of the boar, symbolizing death itself. So this is all about the origin of death itself. When Diarmuid is finally killed by the boar, that is the archetypal myth of the origin of death among mortals. So if Diarmuid had been revived, the idea is that it might be similar to the underlying meaning is, because Diarmuid dies here, death is confirmed at last. Death is confirmed in the world. And if he had been revived, that would have prevented death from really entering the lineage of the world. And when Grainne finds out that Diarmuid has died, she gives birth to 3 dead babies. So it's like death entering his lineage, really really underlining death entering the world. And let's see, what else is there? The other thing I want to say about Diarmuid's death is he is also, after he dies, Angus can go to him whenever he wants and breathe life into him, and he'll talk to Angus, which obviously that is similar to the Mimir myth. So this is another thing.
Necromancy.
Another thing connecting Diarmuid to Mimir is that he dies, but he can talk and give, whenever Angus. It's not Finn. Finn is the Odin parallel, but it's Angus. So it'd be like if Freyr went and talked to Mimir. But also, there is, across Ireland, there are multiple different folk traditions about Donn himself. And he's even called, probably there's a figure called Finvar, who is probably just another name of Donn, which is interesting because it has the name Finn in it, but that just means white. Finvar, white-headed or something. So there are all these different traditions of Donn with different epithets attached. And there's one figure in the legends called Donn Bo, which it just means brown cow or dark cow, but generally it would be taken as just brown cow, Donn Bo. Bo means cow, and Donn means brown or dark. But So you could just say his name, he just means he's brown cow. He's not connected to Donn, but his name has the word Donn in it also. So he's Donn Bo. So he could be connected to the Donn mythos. And what happens to Donn Bo is he gets killed in battle and then beheaded, and his head becomes a singing and speaking head that then tells tales about, sings different songs and also tells how he was killed and stuff like that, and who killed the king and things. So you have connected to Donn, a singing severed head, potentially, and then you have Diarmuid, who is also able to be revived and to speak whenever he has the breath blown into his lungs. Both kind of pointing to parallels with Mimir. So I thought that was important to point out.
I swore I saw something about Yama with beheading, but I can't remember it now.
Okay, that reminds me what I wanted to say next. Okay, so there's this big thing about Yima is supposedly cut apart as how he's killed. And scholars try to connect this to Ymir, just because Ymir, but if you think about it, Ymir is actually beheaded. He's cut apart, but he's beheaded specifically. His head is separated from his body, sky and earth. And then Mimir is also beheaded. So Mimir and Ymir's cutting apart is pretty similar. And these things can kind of shift as well. But specifically, the way that Ymir is killed is what is important. So in Iranic tradition, Yima it's the general idea is that he's cut apart. But if you look at the details, in some traditions, there's many texts on this, but he is disemboweled and then thrown to wild animals. So here's a quote. It says, Bivarasp, which is a name of Zahak, tore out his intestines and swallowed them before sawing him. And then Dahak threw him to wild beasts, which tore him apart. And that's from the Tabari and the Talebi. So there's the story is that Zahak and Spitzarura or something, a couple of figures, another brother of Yima, they go to the tree that he's in. They saw the tree, and then they saw through Jamshid's body, but also they tore out his intestines and throw him to wild beasts. Well, in the Diarmuid story, he's in a tree and they get him out of the tree. They don't saw down the tree. And then later, he's disemboweled by a wild beast. So I think that this cutting apart thing too much emphasis has been put on cutting apart, and that it's, I think in other traditions, you see the beheading of Mimir is actually the cutting apart, and that the disemboweling of Diarmuid is actually the same thing, even though he's not cut apart, but Donn Bo is beheaded. So these are coming from an original source. But people put too much emphasis on cutting apart. They think it just means like dismembering, like Ymir is dismembered. But it's putting too much emphasis. It's putting the wrong emphasis on this myth, because if you look at the parallels, it's actually there's these other things happening, including disemboweling and wild beasts and beheading, and those are what you see more repeatedly.
Well, it's interesting that he swallows his entrails, because obviously entrails were used for divinatory practices in pretty much every Indo-European culture and beyond. So could be swallowing the knowledge, I guess. I don't know. I'd also like to add it has no relevance, but skulls are round, so.
Yeah. But I do want, one thing I want to push back on in general is this. People want to say, oh, look, Yima was cut apart. It's very vague. He was cut apart, or he was sawed apart. It doesn't say, his head, it doesn't say they cut his arms into the, I don't know. People put way too much emphasis trying to directly equate Yama and Ymir. even though there's problems with the etymology, and it's just not the right mythic parallel. And so when you look at the Diarmuid one, you can see the actual parallel between the disemboweling, he's in the tree, which is also in the Yima one, the disemboweling and the wild beast. Those are consistent between those, and then the beheading is consistent in other things, which is beheading is also a form of cutting apart. So, let's see. I don't know if anyone will agree with me, but to me, when you look at all this context, and you also look at the singing severed head, and you also look at in traditions of Donn, there's some traditions where he gives blessings to musicians. It's not super widespread, but there are a couple stories where people propitiate him or ask him for musical and bardic blessings.
Where is that, by the way? Can you post that in the chat? I'd be interested.
Yeah. I have it in the note here, but okay, actually I have it right here. Okay, I'll read it. So this is from just a long article about Donn and the Donn tradition that I can't remember the name, but it says, see Fairy Tale 82 in Macanary. This poor harper became twice endowed with the gift of magic music by Donn, but lost it each time on account of his greed. And then another one, Donn twice shows Macanary. So Macanary, he's a legendary figure in the Gaelic tradition. Donn twice shows Macanary his wizardry in cutting off ugly heads and placing them on again as beautiful ones, a frequent motif in fairy tales. And then another, in Fairy Tale 84, Donn unscrews his horse's leg to get it shod by the smith and adjusts it again. So another one, tradition of music heard about the hill was tradition of music heard about the hill was heard music, and were glad. Coming across the hill, heard the fairy music more than once. Finn's, let's see, in the Tech Dunn's cycle, Finn's little musician and his fairy wife. Okay, so that's different stuff. About Donn's power, also see other. Okay. A local scribe not named once called him, that is Donn, quote, a druid of potence, of magic, and black grammar. And then on a cold wintry day, he met a stranger who, warming his hands in his own, bestowed on him the gift of beautiful music, but requested in return to be taken to Macanary as his companion. After they had some success together, the musician, mean and greedy, left his companion outside a castle where he was invited to play. But there and then he lost his music suddenly and was scornfully turned out by the people. His friend met him again, and telling him that he could not get on without him, rubbed his hands and accompanied him to the castle. Now Macanary's fine music pleased the people, and he was richly rewarded. On the secret advice of his friend, he told the master of the castle that he could do greater things, namely supply an ugly person with a beautiful head. Macanary's companion performed the operation of the ugly gentleman of the castle by cutting off his head, washing it again, and putting it on again using some magical powder. Okay, so that's stories of Macanary, and also connected to Donn.
It's pretty mimeric.
It's mimeric, and it points. Okay, I don't know if you guys will agree with me at all. This could be a big stretch. I want to say, first of all, I would like to test the idea of the Orpheus parallel, which I've mentioned before, that because Hades is usually equated with Yama, but a lot of his narrative doesn't match up super well. There are some little things. There are some things you can point to, especially the eating of the pomegranate in Hades' domain confirms, traps Persephone and confirms that she will remain in the land of the dead. And there are some connections to Saranu, the parent, Demeter, the parent of Persephone, can be compared to Saranu, the parent of Yama, but that's Persephone and not Hades. And obviously being Lord of the Dead and possibly some other things. But this overall, if you look at the Diarmuid myth that I've laid out, almost none of that really fits with what we know of Hades. But when you look at Donn, and he's connected to severed heads and sometimes to music in a small way at least, and then Mimir is also connected to some similar themes. What happens in the Orpheus story, if you kind of piece together different elements from different texts, I think. But one thing you can construct is at the marriage of Orpheus and Eurydice. So Orpheus and Eurydice get married, and at the wedding, or sometime around the wedding, I think there's a version where it's at their marriage, she is bitten by she falls into a pit of vipers or is bitten by a snake and it kills her. So right there you have the close uniting of their marriage that introduces death to directly to Eurydice, at least, and it's by a serpent. So we have these three themes of the marriage between them being closely connected to serpents and serpent introducing death. And then, she's taken to the underworld, she dies, and then Orpheus descends to hell. Yima also descends to hell for a few, like 2 or 3 times, to one of the times to seal death in hell. I don't have the note in front of me, but there's a couple variations on him descending to hell. There is also some question about whether Eurydice was actually in the descent to hell of Orpheus, I think, as far as what I read. And I don't have all the details there, but if you imagine for a second that possibly Orpheus just descended to hell for a different reason, and it wasn't all about Eurydice dying, then that parallels other versions a little better, perhaps. That, the marriage to Eurydice is important because that parallels, the marriage to Grainne and all that. But there isn't a story of, say, Diarmuid descending to hell to get Grainne out. That doesn't exist. But if Eurydice wasn't, if Eurydice wasn't really there, that wasn't really the reason Orpheus descended to hell. It would be a little more similar to Yama descending to hell for these to retrieve certain things. And then you have the theme of almost getting, resurrection or immortality. Like Diarmuid is almost revived, and which would confirm, which would push death out of the picture a bit in that story. And in the story of Eurydice and Orpheus, you do have the motif of he's allowed to bring Eurydice back to the land of the living, but he breaks the taboo at the last second that he can't look back, and he loses Eurydice back. Obviously Diarmuid also breaks a taboo that loses one of his wives, which is the sovereignty goddess in that case. And she vanishes. So that is a little bit similar, the sovereignty goddess disappearing. And actually, now that I'm thinking about this, after the sovereignty goddess, the Loathly Lady, vanishes from Diarmuid, he is able to track her to the other world, basically, or to some mystical place. And he finds drops of blood on the path there. And when he goes there, she's deathly sick. And he is told to go get this cup of water from another otherworldly, it might be a Prajapati figure. So I don't know who he goes to. He has to cross a river and go to this land, this far off land, to get another magical cup that will have healing waters, and he has to put the drops of blood that she has dropped into the water and have her drink it. But he's told once she drinks it and comes back to life, he won't love her anymore. His love for her will be gone, and so it'll be over for them anyways. So he does that. He goes to this land, gets this cup, brings it to her. She's deathly sick. He's able to give it to her and revive her back to life, but then his love is gone for her, and so that's the end of their story. So then he does. So essentially, he loses her. That could be also similar to Orpheus going to hell to save Eurydice, and at the last second he's not able to. So there's these different motifs that kind of are colliding or distributed a little differently, but you could see a parallel to Eurydice either in that the loss of the sovereignty goddess, he breaks a taboo to cause that to happen, and then he eventually loses her. You know, he is able. He tries to bring her back to life, but then he does bring her back to life, but he loses her. What was that?
Orpheus does get beheaded, doesn't he?
And then I was going to say, and then you have that's the big thing that really points to it. But then you also have the Diarmuid almost getting revived by Finn, but then at the last second he doesn't. So that's a major theme in Origin of Death stories. I want to reiterate across cultures, and you have it in the Orpheus myth with Eurydice is almost revived, but then she isn't, and that kind of confirms that could have originally come from a theme about confirming the death or the loss of the sovereignty goddess. I'm not sure. And then of course Orpheus is torn apart and beheaded. As we've seen, Diarmuid is torn apart, disemboweled, and Donn is beheaded, and Yima is both disemboweled and cut apart, and then you have Mimir, who's beheaded, of course, as well in a less detailed version. So and Orpheus is this big, the big, well-known singing head. Of course, comes back to the singing head, who is the
also
master of esoterics. Related to music, he's a great musician. So that connects to some of the Donn stuff. But like I said, the Donn connection to music is pretty small, minor. There's a few mentions of it, but it's there. So that's what makes it interesting. And then Yama becomes a big a giver of esoteric secrets of immortality. In like the Upanishads and later other texts, it's Yama who the seeker goes to learn the secret esoteric wisdom. And Orpheus is obviously, there's Orphism and secrets of esoteric wisdom surrounding Orpheus. And also the last thing is that Orpheus, his name, and Josephus could maybe have insight on this, but the Wikipedia says that Orpheus, one of the possible etymologies connects him or is cognate to the word for darkness, which is like Orphne. But generally his name is interpreted as connected to being an orphan, but also Orphne, I think, is darkness, and the name Donn means the dark one.
Well,
so dark.
It's also interesting that Hades and Dionysus and Orphism ultimately were conflated. Then we have Orpheus being this the center of the Dionysic religion here, and that's all I gotta say on that.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm putting forward is the possibility that this Yama thing is more connected to Orpheus somehow, and maybe whether he's like an emanation or he was originally. But also, he's more of a demigod, I think, or rather than a human, rather than a deity.
Actually, Yama is a good parallel of Orpheus. There's no denying that. It's pretty obvious with the beheading and with the descent to the underworld and everything that comes with it. But Hades also stays as a good parallel, not maybe a perfect one because he's not mortal, but he still has many of the same functions. Also, like even if you look at weird details, like Euhemerus, who was accused of atheism, is possibly not the most obvious source to mention, but he does say that Hades had a twin sister who died shortly after being born. obviously that wouldn't make
Mhm.
a lot of sense if you look at it from the usual lenses of Greeks and being, a believer in the gods' eternity and immortality. But then, if you look at it in a comparative perspective, having a twin sister who dies is kind of
Mm.
reminiscent of
Yes,
the whole Yama and Yami
that's true.
situation and other instances like that. And
Looks
then
like
also Hades is
I'm gonna have
strongly
to run away.
associated with
I'm gonna
beheading.
have to run out,
So
and I'm gonna have to jump out. But you should finish what you're saying, and I'll just jump
yeah,
out.
no, I was just saying that Hades is also associated with beheadings. So Orpheus
Mm.
dying by
Yeah.
being beheaded probably is a further way to connect him to Hades and to kind of point out to the fact that Orpheus is on the heroic level, the same thing that Hades is on the divine level, right? Another element of this connection is that Eurydice is also
Yes.
possibly a name of Persephone. So, I mean, it's kind of explicitly telling you that they're ultimately associated.
All right. All right. So we're ending it there. Yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, the arguments have been laid out, I guess. So
Yeah.
I hope
This-
that people can appreciate these connections and hopefully give us some feedback, I guess. Like,